Hi class, good morning. It's Professor Susie. I thought I would go ahead this morning and provide you with some tips and strategies for getting started on the draft of your course project that's due at the end of Module 4 this week, and get you a little more comfortable with a couple of the concepts and definitions for influences, for example, or impacts. So let's go ahead and advance the slide. Bear with me a second here. Here are a couple of examples of, how you might want to be thinking in terms of the impacts of the cultural work that you've chosen. An example might be the fact that Bob Dylan and Joan Baez, for example, were performers at the 1963 March on Washington when Dr. King delivered his famous speech. They sang "The Times They Are A-Changin'" by Bob Dylan, and as a result of doing so, they both built important legacies for themselves as musicians, and they attracted the attention also of the white majority. So those are a couple of impacts right there that are very important. Bob Dylan, in fact, went on to get the Nobel Prize, and that was controversial a few years ago when it happened, but that's one of the results, that's one of the outcomes. So think of impacts kind of as influences or outcomes as well. In fact, prior to that performance that day, Dylan had been influenced by American folk singers like Woody Guthrie. He was influenced by Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis. Joan Baez has cited Harry Belafonte and the folk singer Pete Seeger as some of her influences. So it's kind of a circular thing in a way. The artist or the musician or the writer has been influenced by others in that profession or in that industry, and they in turn ideally go on to influence younger people or mentor younger people directly or indirectly. Here are a few additional examples for you to consider or think about. We're all familiar with the 1960s TV series Star Trek, and it was briefly on NBC from 1966 to 69, but it went on to spin off all sorts of feature films and TV shows, as you know, merchandise, characters. It's just almost infinite. It goes on and on and on. And Gene Roddenberry worked with Lucille Ball originally to get it on TV. It was not that easy to get on TV, but it's had phenomenal influence since. Queen's album from 1975, A Night at the Opera, with Freddie Mercury, has changed the music industry, has changed the rock music industry, we might say. They have gone on to influence Nirvana, for example, and Katy Perry and Lady Gaga, and many other musicians cite them and that album as a turning point for them and a major influence. Freddie himself claims to have been influenced by everyone from John Lennon to Elvis to great jazz musicians like Ella Fitzgerald, David Bowie, etc. Also, in terms of films, in 1939, Gone with the Wind, along with The Wizard of Oz, they both premiered that year. They both were at the theater that year. But Gone with the Wind broke new ground of all sorts with Technicolor. They received 10 Oscars, all sorts of new ground broken in the film industry by that one. Most feature films are not that long. They're not 4 hours long. I'll grant you, but it's been an important film and an important influence, and that year was very important in Hollywood history. Let's think about the relationship between culture and expression, because you're asked in the rubric to generate a couple of questions that are about or that concern the relationship between culture and expression. And it's ideal to get a little bit specific with this. My examples here are: how does inequality affect artists and musicians? Or how are female artists and musicians, are female artists and musicians still experiencing sexism? My guess would be that they are, but that would be a jumping off point for some good research. In addition to Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, for example, which Latin American artists have influenced other artists in the US, the most profoundly? And which musicians are the most directly responsible for jazz becoming acceptable as a musical form earlier in the 20th century? Early in the 20th century, it was a scandalous type of music with the white majority. So which musicians took that to the mainstream is what I'm after there. Now, please don't plug one of these into your paper. They're visual aids. They're meant to be examples, and I'd like for you to generate your own questions regarding the relationship between culture and expression. And questions regarding your values. Here are some ways or some strategies for approaching this. Think about a time when a painting at a museum, perhaps, or a novel that you read, or a poem, or a movie, or a song actually literally changed your opinion about something, about a social issue, for example. But it doesn't have to be a social issue. Just a time when, some cultural work really changed you in a profound way or changed how you thought and felt about something. Think about how your experience of rock or hip hop or rap or jazz or gospel has shaped your values. I'm guessing that some of you had music at church, folk music or gospel music shape your values to some degree. Think about your favorite movie. Did it change your ideas of, generally of what movies can potentially do and be? And was there some profound message or something about a character or a scene that has always stayed with you, for example? When my mom was alive, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird was both her favorite movie and her favorite novel. Has some novel or short story or poem impacted you in a memorable way? Robert Frost's poems have influenced and impacted a lot of Americans, when they've read his poetry in high school, for example, at the high school level. The one about mending fences or The Road Not Taken, for example. But think about whether that was due to a profound idea that was presented or just the use of color, the use of language, a specific character, something about the lyrics or the music itself, the musical composition, whatever it was. We've all had our values, at least to some minor degree. Our values have been impacted or shaped in some way by music or movies or literature. So lastly, here are some ways to think about your response in the draft regarding how you would go about researching these questions. Keep in mind that not all of the questions that you come up with or generate will necessarily lend themselves to traditional library sources. Some might require you to be self-reflective, particularly ones about your values, and to go back in time and remember what the circumstances were. Sometimes it can be appropriate to survey other people, a certain demographic of people, to get insight, and that's fine too. But when library research is indicated, note that you want to try to include some reference to Shapiro Library subscription databases. I think I've given you that hint before. But the Shapiro Library subscription databases are the best jumping off place for a topic. It's much preferable preferable to and better than Googling a topic, which usually results in you getting hundreds or thousands of hits that you have to sift through. So that's how the databases help you out. You get a meaningful group of results almost right away if in fact you're using relevant keywords. And then also consider if the question that you're posing, that you're thinking about including in your draft, is too broad or too vague in some way. to actually research or reflect on at all? You know, is it just one of those very unanswerable questions? Perhaps it is. And when that's the case, you need to either narrow it down or go back to your drawing board and think about a question that can be researched. So, okay, guys, certainly reach out with any questions or concerns that you have, you know, before the due date and before you submit. Good luck. I think most of you appear to have really good topics chosen. So, again, thanks for listening, and reach out with any questions. Have a good week. Thanks. Thanks for listening and watching.